Welcome. My name is Jason Van Hasselen. I'm a PhD research fellow at Fjellhaug University College in Oslo, Norway. And I am joined today by Professor Joel Biermann from St. Louis. Welcome, Joel.
Great to be here.
We're continuing our video series here, and we've already talked about the law and gospel distinction, some of the issues that surface because people fail to make the right distinctions there. We've talked about ethics, and I was hoping that we could maybe continue talking about the ethics a bit.
I can talk about that all day.
I'm curious if you're a professor in systematic theology,
Right.
but you have a special focus on Christian ethics or ethics. Was there something that you read that piqued your interest? Or what?
That's a great question. What it wasn't really so much what I read as my experience in the parish. I was a parish pastor for 11 years, and during that time serving in the parish, I really didn't have any academic aspirations. I was just a full blast parish pastor. That's what I did. Yeah. So I wasn't reading any scholarship stuff or anything during that time, just surviving as a parish pastor. Yeah. And one of the things I encountered in my experience with people was a pretty strong antinomian streak among parishioners. I have Christian liberty. Don't tell me how to live. I have freedom in Christ. You can't tell me this is right or wrong. And I was getting this from people. Yeah. And so I was frequently pushing back against that and saying, no, God expects this, this, and this. And there were sometimes I was even getting pushback from other pastors who were saying, you're being a little legalistic. And that really got me thinking, am I being legalistic? What's going on here? And my own training when I came through the seminary was kind of in a law gospel reductionistic idea. The law being negative, kind of the Ehlert influence and Althaus kind of influence had made a big impact. And so I began to really struggle with that. So when I went back to do my grad work, I wanted to do it in the area of the third use of the law, and kind of exploring that. And my doctor father, Charles Aaron, said, that's been done too much, do something else. And so it was actually another professor who had me read a section from Hauerwas. Yeah. And Stanley Hauerwas said in this little excerpt that the problem is Lutherans can't do ethics because they're too hung up on justification. And so my professor said, why don't you make that your study? I thought, all right. So that's what I did. Yeah. And it covered the third use of the law is what I wanted to, I was exploring the same issues. Is there a place for the law in the life of the Christian? That's basically what I was exploring. And does Lutheranism really undercut it or not? And so that's what led to my research and my book and all that. It was growing out of that experience. It was my parish experience and the challenge of Hauerwas that kind of drove me to do it.
Interesting. What is different about Hauerwas's model, if you even want to call it a model, and say what you're trying to do in your book?
Oh, that's an awesome question. I don't know if I've ever been asked it quite like that. For a head-to-head comparison, Hauerwas is hard to pin down. Anybody who's tried to explain Hauerwas knows this. Yeah. He's self-described as a Methodist, Roman Catholic, Anabaptist, Anglican. And so he's all over the place. Probably his strongest influences, though, are from like John Howard Yoder and that kind of Anabaptist nonviolence thing. It's huge for him. But coupled with this is this desire to actually follow Christ and for the church to be the church and to be faithfully doing what it means to follow Christ and not being sucked in by the world. So those are the parts of Hauerwas I find quite attractive and quite interesting. Right. So the idea of the church actually courageously, unapologetically being the church, following Christ, not trying to curry favor with the world or with the governments or even institutions, but just being the church, that I think is right on. What I find trouble with is when you have this kind of thoroughgoing Anabaptism, which confuses the realms, the temporal realm and the spiritual realm, or what Luther would call sometimes gets called the left and the right-hand kingdoms, even though I think the better language is the spiritual realm and the temporal realm. And that to me is my biggest issue. So for me, I guess the single biggest contrast between Hauerwas and myself, besides he's not sacramental the way I would be, those kinds of things, would be our understanding of the realms. Yeah. And the fact that I would say, no, I think Luther is actually scriptural and actually faithful to the church's teaching, that we can distinguish what I do in service to the world is one thing, and where I stand before God in my identity as a forgiven child is another thing. They absolutely feed each other and overlap. We're not going to bifurcate them. That's the criticism Hauerwas rightly makes against that. We don't want to bifurcate them, but neither do we blend them in together, which is what I see him doing. They just become, he's not able to say a soldier is doing a good work. He can't say that.
Right.
And I think we can say that.
Yeah. And I would venture to say that what you've just summarized for us is fair, because he has endorsed your book.
Well, yeah, he did.
And he obviously feels that you've represented him.
Yeah, I think.
fairly,
Well,
yeah.
he shared with me in other conversation that he was surprised to learn that Luther actually had so much room for good works.
Yeah.
So I accomplished actually my purpose,
Yeah.
which was trying to demonstrate that in the Confessions and in Luther himself, he's not antithetical to a Christian life.
No.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what's been the most important work written on Christian ethics, aside from your book, of
Yeah.
course,
Well, that's not the most important.
in the last, let's say, 20 years?
Oh, 20 years. That's difficult.
I'm thinking about people who may want to explore this deep.
Yeah, I would
Deeply,
say
yeah.
that the work. I mean, I'm not sure about the time frame, 20 years. Gilbert Meilander has done really extraordinary good thinking on this. He's known widely in our circles as might be like a bioethics guy, but he's actually a very good theologian and very good doctrinal theologian who's done a lot of thinking about this. He's got some essays called like Heart Set to Obey. There's a very good book he has out called The Freedom of the Christian. And I would really highly recommend that. It's
Yeah.
a very good book.
Yeah.
Oswald Bayer, German theologian, also has done some helpful writing on this. I don't agree with him on everything. A little more nuanced. He's a little more leaning to the philosophical side of things, I think. But
Yeah.
it's helpful.
Yeah.
If you go a little further back, if you give me that kind of latitude, one of my favorite theologians who gains, I have a greater appreciation for him all the time is Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Yeah.
And his ethics is really quite remarkable. And if even just a single essay, his essay Christ, Reality, and Good, he just gets the basic moves so right, and I appreciate him more all the time.
Yeah. Would you say he's had the most impact on your theological reflection?
He has significantly more, and he didn't so much when I wrote my book, but I've been reading him more and more after that, and I'm just seeing so much alignment, and I've been shaped by him without even maybe by it being intentional, but I think he is being a faithful Lutheran. And I know people resist that and say, they're not so sure. I really think he is. And I know he was influenced by Karl Barth, and there's that going on. But I do think he's being faithful to his Lutheran heritage, and he is, I think, articulating Luther quite well. Because even like the example I brought up earlier about the two realms, people will sometimes say, well, Bonhoeffer rejected the two kingdoms. Well, he did in the context of Germany in the 30s, when you had that as the excuse for, just let, the Third Reich do what they're going to do.
Right.
And he rejects that out entirely. But he also says that Luther didn't mean that. And so, so you've got to read Bonhoeffer carefully. While he's rejecting Lutheran theology in his day, he's not rejecting Luther and his theology. And that's one of the distinctions I make also in Case for Character, is that you have to make a distinction between what Luther actually taught and practiced and what Lutherans in the 20th century or 21st century do in his name. And there's often a huge disparity there.
Yeah. And you would say that Luther developed in his thinking, of course, over perhaps.
Perhaps. I think with Luther, I'm one of these guys who tends to think that Luther's pretty consistent.
Okay.
I think his basic theology was pretty well established by 1520, 21. I think it was pretty solidly there, maybe even a little sooner. But I think what he does then is what develops is his application
Right.
or the context. Because as the context shifts from pushing back against Rome to pushing against sacramentarians or antinomians in his own camp, he changes his tune, but he's not changing his theology. He's just changing the message that needs to be delivered.
Yeah.
And so, sure, there's a development. We all are going to be developing, but I don't think he ever makes really fundamental changes along the way.
Yeah. On a similar point, have you maybe changed your mind about something that you published in your case for?
No.
No.
No, I don't think I have
Okay,
yet.
yeah.
I think everything is in Case for Character. I'm still standing by that all, and I haven't changed my mind about any of that.
No. Okay.
No.
Fair enough. How does ethics relate to vocation?
That's a very good question and a very potent one. vocation is one of these wonderful ideas. That word captures so much because we have, we're called into the Christian faith. We have that vocation of being Christian, which is the first move that Paul makes. But then we also have the idea of being called into our places of responsibility. This is a term that Robert Benny uses, which I like. Or the idea of just this kind of your situation in life, your stand, and where you happen to be. And to me, that's what Luther's really doing with vocation. He recognizes that God has placed every one of us simply by the physicality and materiality of where we're born and situated in relationships. And these relationships make demands on us. And as creatures, we have a responsibility to do that. And so ethics, frankly, is always played out in vocations. You really can't do ethics apart from vocations. This is one of the really powerful Lutheran applications of this whole thing. You see, is that ethics can never be about self-promotion or self-improvement. It's always about service to the other. And the only reason I work on improving myself is so that I can be a better servant to others. And this, I wanted to say this earlier from the last discussion we had. This is what distinguishes a Lutheran understanding of virtue from maybe an Aristotelian. And this is maybe one thing I would sharpen when I write my book again about this, is virtue ethics is great, because we think about what it means to be fully human and faithfully human and doing what God gives us to do. But the big difference between a classic virtue ethics person like Aristotle and a Lutheran trying to do virtue ethics is the focus. For Aristotle, the focus is on me being what I'm supposed to be. And it's very self-referential. I would say for a Lutheran being faithful, the focus is not me, it's the other. It's the neighbor. And this is classic Luther, that the Christian always lives outside of himself, in faith toward God, in love toward the neighbor. And so when I'm living in love toward the neighbor, the objective is, what do I need to do for my neighbor in my vocational responsibilities as father, as husband, as professor? How do I serve my neighbor? And I do that by dying to myself and living for the other. And so when I learn patience, and I work on the virtue of determination, I work on the virtue of compassion, those things make me a better person, okay? But more importantly, they make me better in my vocations. And they make me better able to serve those around me.
Yeah. And Jesus embodies this perfectly, doesn't he?
Exactly.
And it's always towards others,
Yes.
to the glory of the Father.
Precisely. So my goal is not to, I want to be a great person so God sees how great I am and to glorify God. No, the goal is simply to serve the other, and God is glorified in that service. It's exactly right. And Jesus, precisely, he is the one who is fully human, who exemplifies what it means to be fully human, and shows us that image of what it looks like to be what God created us to be.
And it's not even so much that he was sinless that makes him human, right?
In a sense, you're right. It's that he's simply being obedient to the Father, and his sinlessness, of course, is tied to that. But the being sinless is essentially what it means fully human, because sin is always an aberration of our humanity. That's correct. But it's the fully human aspect of Christ is that he's immaterial, he's enfleshed, corporeal, but he's also then being obedient as a creature to his Creator. Pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool. Maybe for someone who's trying to figure out God's will for their life, right?
Who would do that?
Who would do that? What would you say to that person? In light of what we've already discussed today, works, justification.
That's a great question, because I find a lot of very pious in a good way. And I've been on a campaign my whole teaching career to redeem the word piety, because in my context, that's not a good word. Piety is kind of almost a curse word, pious. But I know in a Norwegian context, it's a good word, but in mine, it's not. So I like the word pious. I like the word piety. But I would say a pious person, a young person typically, who's really serious about following Christ and takes their faith really authentically, and they want to do this, they're frequently really concerned about, I want to do God's will. And this becomes a really important thing. And that's a good question to ask. What is God's will? But then sometimes it becomes almost debilitating for them, because they're so concerned about, I want to make godly decisions. I want to do God's will. And so, where does God want me to go to college? What career should I do? What career does God want me to do? Who should I marry? Who is God's person for me? And they're so concerned about, because they have this almost idea that there's this one vision through life. There's one track that God has planned for them, and they've got to figure it out. And if they make a wrong decision, oh no, it's all going to come crashing down, and all outside of God's will. Yeah. And it's debilitating. It's crippling, because that's a heavy weight to bear. And so I think what we get when we really understand a Lutheran ethic and a Christian ethic is it kind of just cuts through all this. What are you supposed to do? God's will. Oh yeah, I want to do God's will. Yeah. Well, what is God's will? Obey His commandments. So have no other gods. Honor your father and mother. Help others around you. Serve them. And then you start getting into the vocation thing. Well, where are you in life? Well, I'm a son or a daughter. Well, be a good son. I'm a student. Well, be a really good student. I've got friends. Well, be a really good friend and help your friends thrive. And then you need to ask the question, okay, I'm doing those things. What else does God want me to do? Well, then you start asking the question, how has God gifted me? You know, the Matthew 25, right. Parable of the talents. Yeah, yeah. What has God given to me? And what am I supposed to be doing with those things? I should be using those to better serve those around me, to be a good human in this creation. So I think the Christian should be asking the question frequently, am I using the gifts I've been given to serve those around me? Does that mean I have to go into church work? No. Does it mean I have to move to the mission field to do this? No. But I should be asking the question, am I using what I've been gifted with to serve those around me in ways that encourage them and help them walk more closely with Christ? And if you're saying yes to those things, you're doing God's will. Yeah. And so which college you go to, take your pick. If they're all going to help you to use your gifts and to serve others, you've got latitude. And there's a lot more latitude within God's will than we realize. Yeah. And so far as, the kinds of hobbies you have, the kinds of books you read, you want to make sure that they're all helping you to walk more closely with Christ and be better at serving others. But that's really the parameters. Within that, there's a lot of room. And I don't really believe God has this like plan A, and if you make a wrong mistake, oh my goodness, you've blown it. Yeah, it's all messed up. Yeah. So there's a lot more freedom in doing God's will than people realize.
Yeah, that's helpful. My hope is that the viewers are somewhat of a mixed audience here, and we've touched upon a lot of practical stuff, but I'm wondering if maybe you could say something about the work that still needs to be done, perhaps maybe at an academic level. Are there some things that you hope others will take from your work and perhaps develop further?
Oh, that's a very good question.
We are at the Fjellhaug, so
yeah, that's
I feel
appropriate.
obliged to ask. Yes,
that's appropriate. I've not given that a lot of direct thought, so I have to contemplate that a little bit. I think I would like to see more work done in the areas of ecclesiology, and I know this is not directly tied to ethics, but I think it does get there, because you see, it's in the context of the church and that community of the church where we are living out our ethical life and where we're doing these things. Yeah. And so I think ecclesiology needs a lot more work in a Lutheran context, and I really do think the ethical angle helps with this. And I think Bonhoeffer's getting at some of that too. I mean, he wrote Life Together, and this was really important to him, his experience, at Finkenwalde. And that's part of this. And he never let go of this. That's always a part of what's animating his ethics. Yeah. It's always in community. And that's also a Hauerwas and McIntyre kind of emphasis, which I'm interested in. Yeah. So that's one thing, is thinking more carefully about the ecclesiological connections. The other thing I think needs much more exploration is aesthetics, and the whole place of arts and what that means of human work and production and culture. That's clearly tied into vocation, service to others, and it's also tied into what it means to be human. And that's been underexplored. Yeah. And there's a huge area that can be done there.
Well, there's some good thesis ideas there.
Yeah, yeah. Yep.
As we wrap up here, is there anything else that you'd like to say that you haven't?
There's always more to say.
Had a chance to say? Or?
No, I just so have enjoyed my time in Norway, frankly, and getting to know the Christians here and the church here, the churches, the whole experience here. Yeah. It's fascinating, and it's really a delight. Yeah. It's what encourages me, and this gets back to the ecclesiology thing, is just the bonds in Christ that transcend culture and ties place and history, because we have commonalities around our common confession, around our common desire to follow Christ, and that it's delightful to be able to share those fellowship times and that encouragement together. So it's been a great joy here.
It's been a joy for us too.
All right.
If somebody is interested in buying your book, or maybe finding other resources
Yeah.
that you've made available, where can they go and
Yeah,
find
my
them?
books are just available on Amazon. I
Do
mean,
you have a
or,
website where you?
I don't have a personal website.
Okay.
No, I don't do that kind of thing. But
Maybe
the
we can put a link in the
sure.
bio here where people can take
Yeah, but
can
if you
contact you.
if you
Yeah.
literally, yeah, you could actually email me or whatever. That's
Mm-hmm.
fine, and you can easily find my books on Amazon. In fact, I know right now you can download my books in Kindle version for a pretty good price. Like,
Okay.
it's not a lot. I think Fortress is having it now available as a Kindle editions, and so you can get a Kindle version of my book for under $10 US.
Yeah.
So it's not bad.
Not in Norwegian yet.
Yeah, I don't think it's translated yet.
Ah.
Nobody's seen that as an imperative.
Okay.
For good reason, probably.
Well, thanks so much, Joel.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.